Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'm making a series of short videos to introduce my new book, The Power of Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Advantages of Your Neurodivergent Brain. This is a completely revised and updated second edition of a book that I originally wrote in 2010. The topic of this video is Disabilities Exist Along Continuums of Competence. When we think about mental disabilities or neurodivergencies, typically we see them in isolation from each other. We've got a ball over here that's autism, and a blue ball down here that's dyslexia, and over here yellow ball that's autism, and we have them all separated from each other. The DSM, which is the Bible of the psychiatrist, tends to work along those lines, where it chunks disabilities into categories and then has criteria for each category. But increasingly, scientists are beginning to understand that many of these disorders exist not as isolated entities, but along a spectra of different kind of qualities and intensities. This is certainly what was recognized in the DSM-5 in the creation of autism spectrum disorders. Originally, they had Asperger's syndrome and another number of other categories. But the idea of autism spectrum disorder recognizes the idea that there is a continua of different qualities, symptoms, temperaments, traits. So, for example, on the same spectrum, you have on the right-hand side a person who masters higher mathematics, can read computer code and write computer code, who is a fount of linguistic data, and who manages social and behavior and communication issues very adequately with neurotypical people. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a person who has little or no communication with others, frequent meltdowns, and constant stimming, such as rocking back and forth. And the fact that both of these disorders or descriptions seem to qualify as autism spectrum disorder creates sometimes confusion, especially within the neurodiversity community. We've had people who are coming more from the what used to be called higher functioning level of the spectrum, saying the people along our spectrum are simply neurodiverse. They're just different. Whereas you have people on the other side of the spectrum where there's little or no communication, frequent meltdowns, and lots of stimming, saying, no, this is not just neurodiverse. This is not just a variety of human functioning. This is a disorder. It's an illness, and we're seeking a cure for it. And this has been a problem. The communication between these two camps has been a problem in the neurodiversity movement. But it can be resolved if we look at the fact that both of these individuals exist along a continuum, which includes, I should say, neurotypical human functioning. And I'll get to that in a minute. If we look at the broader issue of sociability, the ability to communicate well with others, we can put that on a continuum as well, or on a spectrum. And so over on the left-hand side, we might have our classic autistic individual, both high and low functioning. Next to that, we have broader autism phenotype, BAP, and that is someone who shows some of the signs of autism but doesn't qualify for diagnosis with the full autistic diagnosis. Next to that, moving towards increasing sociability, we come to the introvert and the shy personality, someone who doesn't have autistic symptoms at all, but who evinces a shyness in their ongoing connections with other people. Then finally, we get to the neurotypical, which I've marked with a red arrow. I'll explain this in a minute. And then we keep on going towards increased levels of sociability. So the next step might be the extrovert. And the step after that might be the social butterfly. And next to that might be, I don't know, if you might put the sociopath next to that, someone who can function well socially, but to manipulate others and ultimately perhaps destroy them. But at any rate, I want to mention the red arrow because that's where we put normal or neurotypical. But I want to point out that where we put that normal arrow changes from generation to generation and from culture to culture. In video number 4, I have explained how whether or not you're going to be disabled or gifted in a culture may depend upon more where and when you're born than anything intrinsic to yourself as an individual. So this is kind of like the movable. There might be a time where we become a more introverted culture. Going on to literacy. We can see over on one end of the spectrum severe dyslexia, then more moderate and mild dyslexia. Then we might have someone who doesn't have dyslexia, but they're just a poor reader for various other reasons. Maybe poor education, low socioeconomic opportunities, and so on. And then we have our red arrow where we find the neurotypical reader. And then if we keep moving toward greater literacy, we might come to the hyperlexic. Hyperlexia is the ability to read far beyond your years. I'm talking about 2-year-olds who can sit down and read the encyclopedia. They can't comprehend it, but they can read it. So in that sense, they belong on this side of the spectrum, although others might want to put it along with dyslexia as a related disorder. The next spectrum I want to look at is the psychosis spectrum. We don't normally think of psychosis as along a spectrum, but it is. It's not just schizophrenia in this isolated ball that exists well apart from neurotypical functioning. So over on the left-hand side, we may have the classic example of schizophrenia. Then we may have schizophreniform disorder, which is classic signs of schizophrenia, but that don't last any longer than 6 months. Schizoid personality disorder, which doesn't involve the symptoms of schizophrenia, but does include isolation from other people, odd patterns of thought, eccentric behaviors, and so on. And then we come to transit psychosis. And you may wonder, why do I have the red arrow there? Is that where normal functioning is? And the answer is yes. 75 to 90% of all of us have at one time or another during our life had a psychotic-like experience. So we are part of this spectrum. And that's an important point that I'm going to come to in just a minute. Anxiety spectrum. Over on the left-hand side, we might put the most intense forms of anxiety, such as panic disorder and PTSD. Then we might come to a personality disorder like avoidant personality disorder. Then we might come to someone who just has an anxious temperament, not a disorder, but just kind of a quality of their character. And then we may come to normal anxiety. It's normal for people to feel anxiety under different sorts of situations. Some of it's actually good. If you're studying for a test, if you're planning a business meeting or putting together a business plan, having a certain amount of anxiety may actually help you carry out those objectives. So again, this red arrow might move around depending upon the culture, the time, and so forth. Now there's an interesting spectrum that it can be attributed to one scientist, Simon Baron-Cohen, who's a professor at Cambridge University in England. And he's done a lot in terms of our understanding of autism, and in particular, the strengths of autism. And I'll be featuring some of his work in, I believe, the next video in this series. But right now, I want to call attention to his, what he calls his empathizing, systematizing, or systemizing spectrum. And this is a spectrum that suggests on one end, you find people who are systemizers. Systemizers are people, obviously, who work with systems, where there's a fixed input and a fixed output. Examples of systems could be a machine, could be a football game, could be a mathematical system. Empathizing, on the other hand, is very different. It's tuning into the feelings of other people. It's the uncertainty of not knowing what the inputs and the outputs are. But it's the sense of having intimacy with others, not being afraid of that. And so you see, these are almost two diametrically opposite forms of being in the world. Looking at the world as a system to be mastered or as a group of people to be empathized with. And Baron Cohen says that as we get over on the left extreme part of this continuum, you start to see autism spectrum disorders. And if you go on to the other end of the spectrum on the right-hand side, you begin to see bipolar disorders. And this is very interesting because he also has built in, and this is more controversial, he's built in a sexual differences dimension to this, because he suggests that males, for the most part, are over on the systemizing part of the spectrum, while women tend to be on the empathizing part of the spectrum. Now, of course, this is not a fixed. Most of us have combinations of the two. That's why I put the neurotypical in the center, seeming to combine aspects of those. And certainly there are women who are very systemizing. Some of them are autistic, in fact, like Temple Grandin, who's worked with machines, with engineering cattle machinery all her life. And then there's empathizing, which is, there are males who empathize. There are males who are deeply feeling individuals. So we combine both. We find examples of both on either end, but it is an interesting theory. And he writes about this in a book called The Essential Difference. I want to go back to the two slides at the beginning of this video and point out that we tend to treat disorders that we read and hear about as isolated entities. And that can make it more comfortable for us, especially if we're neurotypical. We can put some distance between ourselves and these disorders. But the fact is, knowing that the reality is more like we are all along continua that connect with not just normal behavior, but even healthier, supernormal behavior, makes us realize that we're all connected, that we all have some aspect of the qualities and the disorders that make up neurodiversity. And I think that that's a really healthy thing for us to develop. So that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And I hope that you'll get my book, The Power of Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Advantages of Your Neurodivergent Brain, completely revised and updated, second edition. I have a blog on my website, and you can sign up for my posts by going to my homepage on my website or to my blog page and put your email to subscribe, and you will receive, as a result, my 200-item neurodiversity strengths checklist, which is taken from my book and which is a very positive assessment, especially for people who are neurodivergent, who've taken tests and assessments in the past and have, walked away with just a sense of them being a failure because the emphasis was on the negatives. So go to my website, which is www.institute4learning.com. That's institute, the number 4 learning.com. And you can get not just the blog posts, but the inventory as well. I want to thank you very much for listening in and watching. And I hope that wherever you are around the world, that you take this knowledge to hand, to heart, and to head, and that you use your knowledge to help others who are neurodivergent. Or if you are neurodivergent, that this gives you a greater sense of all the potentials that exist inside of you. Thanks so much.